Now, ladies and gentlemen, I hope you all know or heard about Speedinvest. I remember when Oliver Holle, one of the founder of Speedinvest, a few years ago, he told the story that you had just the first fund, and still there was like 30% of the money in the fund, but because of the successful exits, investors and LPs were queuing Speedinvest office and wanted them to start a new fund. So during they had the first fund, still investing, still with money, they raised their second fund, which was like 10, 15 times larger. I think I understand their approach and what's their secret. They have a very, very different approach, which is not typical among CEE VCs, but I see similar patterns among US VCs. I don't know whether Michael will tell you about it, but happy to invite Michael Schusser, a co-founder and managing partner of Speedinvest, and we asked Michael to share his inputs about how you can grow from CEE to global markets, what they learned out of the successful investments. So, Michael, thank you very much to be here, and the stage is yours.
Let me introduce myself first and probably give you an answer as to why am I here. Leonard already said I'm part of Speedinvest. We're by now, so we raised some more funds recently. So in total, we now manage roughly 200 million, and we invest all in Europe. All over Europe, and our main thesis back when we started was that actually in CEE there's a large number of talent, there's good people, there's good ideas, and we should actually look into that area and do great investments. 7 years later, we feel that it's not as great as we would have hoped. So we're trying and doing what we can do as a fund to actually make that happen. I think we have now 7 investments or 6 investments in Hungary, which is by far the biggest CEE geography that we invested in. Second place, Bulgaria, so you beat the Bulgarians. I don't know if that's any meaningful thing for you. And in total, our companies have raised roughly 120 million follow-on funding, 3 million users on their platform, 1,000 people working for them, 100 million in revenue. So I think quite substantial for roughly 100 investments. And I've been asked to give you kind of an essence out of this experience, what successful companies do or have that are global. Now that's a very difficult thing because the essence, I looked that word up and tried to figure out what it actually means. The essence is, in the very Greek sense of the meaning of the word, it's that what it was to be. So the true meaning of an object, a company, a person, an idea. So trying to figure out what the essence is. So I'm not a philosopher. I'm a trained chef, actually. I used to cook. So for me, this is the essence. It's a very good ingredient done to perfection with as little ingredients or as little other things as possible. So what could you do that's probably as delicious, sorry for the vegetarians and vegans in the room, how can you produce something that is as elegant and simple as this and as delicious? That was my question. So I looked for examples in other industries, right? VCs, no matter what anyone tells you, VCs are nothing but pattern matchers, very well paid pattern matchers. So we try to look for patterns. At some point, I think it will be replaced by AI, but that's not yet there yet. So I looked for patterns in other industries, and I found that, I don't know if anyone of you knows this or what this could be. It is a dish, it's a plate, and it's called 5 Ages of Parmigiano Reggiano, and is a very famous dish by this guy, Massimo Bottura, one of the most famous chefs in the world. He runs a restaurant called Osteria Francescana, has been named top chef of the world for a couple of times. And the question that I ask myself always, like, how do you get to the top like this guy? What do you need to do as a chef to get to the top and then be crazy enough to serve a dish that basically only consists of Parmesan. So how do you get to the top? How are you named top chef of the world? A couple of times in a row, that was the question that I was following. And now you might ask yourself, so why is this guy telling us about cooks, right? We're building software products, we're running sales operations, we're all wearing shirts. I'm not, but you guys are. So why is he doing that, right? And I think, in a way, what we're trying to do here, or what at least we're trying to do at Speedinvest, we're trying the same thing as those guys are trying to do. We're trying to get to the top of the world in an extremely competitive industry where everyone, excuse the pun, everyone cooks with the same ingredients, right? So no one has anything else than the other one. They all know their recipes. They all know how to cook. And what I did, I brought some examples because I think those are the best ones to look at of companies. And I tried to find the similarities between them or the essence of it, right? So let me lead you through a couple of companies in our portfolio. One of them is called Candice, a company from Germany. They're doing bookkeeping automation for small and medium enterprises. Their ambition is they want to become the SAP for SMEs. And they started out with a direct sales model, very much what many people probably would do if they sell to enterprises. And the CEO and the COO and the founding team, they were talking personally to 20 to 30 companies a day for a year. So just imagine that 20 companies, phone calls with 20 companies for a year, every day. That's dreadful, right? Who would want to do that? I mean, I would have certainly, at some point hated my life, but they were doing this. And turns out, after a year, they found out that the original sales approach that they believed in, that they actually built their company on, didn't really work. That was at the time when we already invested. And 2 months before the funding ended, they turned it around, changed to a completely different sales approach, indirect sales model, and that started to work. So they were basically talking to tax accountants to talk to the companies for them. Not because they didn't want to do the calls, but because they just figured out, our approach kind of works, but it doesn't really work. And they had the guts to really change that approach massively. And very recently, Lightspeed Ventures invested, international investor, very well known for some of the companies. And you won't believe it, the CEO still does sales, which for me is always a very interesting thing. So the essence of their approach is they're just super obsessed about the market. And someone said it before, or in the discussion with Avatar, it was about sales, right? I feel that the super successful companies that are going global, they're always obsessed about the market. Next company is from Slovenia called Flaviar. They sell high-quality spirits in small tasting packs. And for me, that's a very interesting story because they want to be the next Diageo. It's a name you probably never heard unless you worked in the spirits industry or have a background there. Because if you look at the bar there, probably 60% of those bottles are made by Diageo. The other 40% is made by Beam Suntory or another one. So there's 3 juggernauts in this industry. They're all billion-dollar companies. And they founded their company in Ljubljana, had no employees, but already they did a UK entity, right? They started off with the UK entity, saw on the way that their main market is in the US because they just looked at the clients and consequently applied to Y Combinator, a US accelerator, and took that offer. So they got in, took that offer, even though the valuation was way lower than their last round. Actually, way lower what we paid, so we might have paid too much. But what that gives me, or the interesting thing is here, if you look at other founders, most of the time they would optimize for valuation. They would try to get the better deal. CloudStorm before in the stage said, if we could double our valuation, that would be cool. Yes, it would be cool, and in some cases it's really a good thing to do. But in other cases, it makes sense to take the lower valuation if you think that that can move you to the next level. And it did. And both the CEO and the chief product officer, they moved to San Francisco and New York. Both of them had families. They had to take their kids out of school, put them in the school in the US, go to the trouble of actually moving there with all the visa trouble, which to me really speaks for a global mindset. If you're willing to do that from day one, that's a global mindset. You clearly set out to build a global company. Third one, Bitmovin, enterprise company. They do video streaming. They're one of the original authors of the MPEG-Dash standard. So if you're streaming Netflix, you're probably using part of their tech. Started straight out of university. It was actually their bachelor or master thesis. Never had a company before. You know, it's their first company. And recently, so in total, they raised over 50 million from Atomico and Highland, growing massively, powering a lot of video services, and operate a global sales force now. They have really people on all continents in all time zones. Built that up within a year and a global team. So of course they have people in Vienna and Carinthia, where they originally come from, so small country in Austria. But they have teams everywhere in the world now. And what they do, what I find super impressive, the CEO is probably one of the best learners I've ever seen in the world. This guy has developed from being a 26-year-old computer science graduate into being one of the best CEOs in our portfolio. How did he do that? By really leveraging that network that YC provided. So they also went through YC and actually finding mentors and really listening to them and changing the strategy. He also moved to the US, and that's something that for me always is a funny thing. So he moved to the US on a European salary, because they had some public grants, so they had a cap on their salary. And if you try to survive in Silicon Valley with 60K euro a year, you'll figure that's difficult. So they must have really wanted this, and they're for me the essence of constant learning. And that's also these three. There's a lot of parallels to how top chefs operate. If you ever saw Noma, one of the top restaurants in the world, this is René Redzepi. He's the chef, the head chef of that restaurant. It's quite an experience, and they operate a huge lab. They probably have 30, 40 people in that lab alone, and the lab does nothing else but come up with new ingredients, come up with new techniques and dishes for them. There's actually also there's two people working in what I like best. It's the fermentation lab. It really looks like a medical room. They just try to come up with new strains of yeast. And the last thing they tried out was what happens to yeast if you play different types of music. So they tried it with Metallica. They got a very aggressive flavor. And they tried it with more mellow music. No, I'm making this up. But they really do the music thing. I just don't know what Metallica did to the yeast. Fourth example, WeFox. So WeFox is a very special story. It's a company that is not even 2 years old and already has $1 billion valuation. The guys started out operating an app for insurance brokers, basically offering them a way to communicate with their clients. So classical B2B sales model, you're sort of a service platform, and they knew from day one that they're going to do an insurance carrier. So just imagine that they were selling to their client, but at the same time, they were planning on disrupting that client. And then something happened, which what I call the Benioff moment. So the CEO of the company, Julian, goes to the US to a Salesforce conference because their whole product is built on top of the Salesforce platform, so on Force.com. And he goes to that event, is invited. There's a panel very much like this, and in the end, the moderator, very much like now, asks, is there anyone with a question? Big audience, no one stands up. That's usually the thing you get. Julian gets up and asks Mark Benioff a question and says, Mr. Benioff, you and I know that your company will face the same path as Microsoft. You're becoming obsolete in a world that is built on other digital tools. How are you planning on reacting to that? So what happened? Time froze for a moment. Health froze over. And Mark Benioff invited this guy to a chat in a separate room, to a little private dinner, to hear his story, because, of course, who knows Mark Benioff knows he likes that type of people. So actually, Salesforce invested into them very early on and gave them sort of that stamp of approval that, you know, Mark Benioff privately invests, or with Salesforce invests in you. That's a good thing. And this guy is able to reproduce these moments. So very recently, he had a meeting in Asia, and whoever knows business rules in Asia, it's all very timid. It's very, you know, you get 20 minutes with the CEO. He had 20 minutes with the CEO of Tencent. They sit down, there's, you know, 3 aides, the CEO never talks, it's always the aides talking until Julian gets up from the table, pulls in a flip chart, and starts to draw the future of WeFox onto the flip chart. And the meeting goes 60 minutes instead of 20. And in the end, they're talking about an investment. And that's, I'm getting the chills when I'm talking about that. So they raised over 100 million already now, and they're close to closing a very sizable round. And the only thing that they really raised it on, I would call, is the market, because insurance is hot. There's not that much traction. Of course there was traction, but it was mostly the market, and I would call boldness. If you're able to get up in that audience and ask that question, you're probably able to close that investment. And that reminded me very much about Ferran Adria, also top chef of the world, basically the guy who invented molecular cuisine. You know, tons of chefs in the world were learning from that guy. So he had the guts to close down his restaurant for 6 months every year. Because he said, I need the 6 months to actually go and invent what I'm going to do the next 6 months. Right? So you run a restaurant, and half a year you just close it down. Because you say, what I want to do, I can only do if I take 6 months off and put it into research to actually make it to the next one. Last one, Tour Radar. Their ambition is, so they're a tour operator. They're selling multi-day tours all over the world. So if you want to go on a 10-day hiking trip on the Himalaya, this is where you book it. So niche market in the global travel market. They started 15 years ago, basically straight out of the college dorm, and it took them a long time until it evolved into what it is now. It's the 3rd iteration of the company or product. They changed brand, they changed what they're doing, how they're doing it. And in 3 funding rounds, in the last 3 funding rounds, so we were their seed investor, in the last 3 funding rounds, in every due diligence, something fell apart. You know, first the investor wanted to optimize the terms, then didn't do it. Second funding round, they made a mistake on the checkout page. Conversion rates dropped. The investor got cold feet, went out. Last funding round, there was some inexplicable numbers, didn't add up. You know, the investor got cold feet, valuation dropped. So 3 funding rounds where actually a lot of other companies would have, you know, just went down or, you know, wouldn't have survived. And they always survived with like a month of runway. And now TCV invested, also US venture fund, one of the oldest and most prestigious. They did a 50 million was the last round. They're now 120 people, 80 million revenue. So I'd say this is going to be one of the best companies in our portfolio. Persistence, that's what their essence is, like not letting go and actually evolving time over time. That's what I find mostly impressive with them. And that reminded me of Jiro. It's a brilliant movie, by the way, if you want to watch it. Jiro Dreams of Sushi. There's this, I think he must be 120. He looks a bit like Yoda. This old Japanese guy who has perfected the way of doing sushi. And with him works the first one of his 2 sons, who's already 50. And he's still just the sous chef because, you know, he hasn't learned enough to master the art of sushi. It's a small restaurant hidden in a garage, so it's not a fancy place, but this guy has perfected it. And I told before, they all have immense competition because they're all cooking with the same ingredients. They're all cooking with the same techniques. And actually, the playbook for startups is done and written, right? There's no more magic about growing a startup. It's all out there. You can all Google it. You can all read it. So the competition is very intense because everybody wants to claim a spot at the top. right? And if you just look how many companies don't get funded or don't make it to the global stage, it's very much like them. Not everyone gets 1, 2, 3 Gomeo stars or whatever. And with all those companies that we saw in our portfolio that were at YC, I think I got a grasp of what I think is the essence of why some make it and some don't. Some go global and some don't. Because I don't know if you know a bit about YC. So Y Combinator is this program, 3 months. You go to the US, you go to this place. You basically have mentoring sessions. Mentoring sessions last 10 minutes. The first 7 minutes, you need to explain Paul Graham, who is arguably one of the best guys in that industry, or Paul Buchheit, who wrote Gmail. So the first 7 minutes, you need to remind them what you're actually doing, because they got 120 companies in their batch, and they can't remember every company. So they got 10 minutes mentoring session, 7 minutes you need to get them up to speed to the issue, and then you get 3 minutes to discuss it. The interview to select you is a 10-minute interview, and they cramp 20 to 30 questions into that interview, right? I mean, if I look at us, most of the times we haven't even started the meeting after 10 minutes, so there's a vast difference. And then they go through this 3-month program, and there's 120 companies, and in the end there's demo day, and everyone raises money, and all of a sudden the companies that I saw before going in, they come out as something entirely different. And what happens to them, in my perspective, is that they sit next to each other, they see the other companies, they see how they start out with a slide where, graph goes up and to the right, and there's probably, this is a 100 million opportunity. And at the end of these 3 months, graph still goes up and to the right, but they say this is a 100 billion opportunity. And they believe all of a sudden that this is a bigger opportunity. And they see that the others next to them, they're working day and night, they're working their asses off to actually make it happen. And I felt that the real difference of YC or these things, and the real difference about the companies that make it and the others that don't, is ambition. Now, I hope you're thinking at the moment, that's a lame speech, right? You're telling us all these examples, and then in the end, it's ambition. That's really lame. But in the end, it's right. What you need to actually pull that off, if you want to make it global, you need to pull off that you have a vector and force. Now, if I look at most of the startups out of CEE, to be honest, most of them lack both. They don't know where they want to go, and they're not pulling enough force behind that path. And that level of ambition that I see in the US, but also in Asia, that willingness to succeed is something that I truly believe is different. And just an example, TourRadar has stopped hiring Austrian people, although they have their headquarters in Vienna, because they found that expats, people that moved in from another country to Vienna, are frequently harder working and more diligent in the things that they do. And that speaks a lot. So escaping that gravitational force of low aspiration, because I think it's really something that is gravitational, and that you need to pull yourself out all the time, is one thing. And then the other thing, I truly believe strategy is dead. Because if you just look at all the companies in your space, think about your strategy. Just take the strategy of your closest 2 competitors and put them next to each other. Your strategy and the 2 other, 3 other, doesn't matter. You can basically do that in any industry. Like, do it in banking, do it in, I don't know where. The strategy statements are completely and utterly the same. They're identical. They use other words. I mean, hell, even in our industry, if you look at VC websites, most of them will tell you the same, right? We're value-add investors. We help you when it gets tough. We're more than money. And we did it ourselves, by the way. So that doesn't help you with anything, right? So what is it then? And that's, again, something where I hope you think that's lame, but I truly believe that that's the case. It's execution. It's just doing that thing right and putting more force behind it, because your strategy is not going to save you on that on that way to going global. Yeah, I think I'm perfectly in time, and I think let's do this and let's have some questions.